My name is Megan. I am 32 years old, and until last Thanksgiving, I believed I was the dutiful daughter who quietly kept the lights on in a home that never truly saw me, the reliable figure in the corner of every family photo, the one who wrote checks while everyone else wrote stories about how family sticks together, even when the sticking looked a lot like taking. The night my father disowned me at the dinner table in front of our relatives didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final splinter from a beam that had been groaning under weight for decades. And if you really want to understand how I went home after that and methodically shut off every bill, service, and system I had funded for 8 years, you have to start in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a modest house on a quiet street where my parents, Eleanor and Richard, raised two children as if one was a crown prince and the other a dependable employee. Because from the time I was 7, I learned how applause could be rationed and how love can be measured by who gets the bigger bedroom, the newer shoes, the louder cheers. Jason, 3 years younger, basked in warm, relentless approval. He brought home a C and rolled a brand new bike into the driveway like a parade float, while my straight A report card earned a distracted pat on the head and a breezy, "Keep it up." And I did keep it up. Through middle school concerts where my solo was met with polite claps while his off-key trumpet got dad to his feet. Through high school where I was the first to wake up, the last to sleep, the one who remembered dentist forms and soccer permission slips and the quiet throb of being necessary but never remarkable. The summer I turned 18, Dad lost a job he'd held at the auto plant for 20 years, and our kitchen table disappeared under late notices. Mom's part-time receptionist paycheck was a thimble in a drought, and while Jason remained in the soft focus of high school, I stood at the threshold of college with a calculator in one hand and a future mortgaged to loans in the other. I signed my name on promissory notes until my signature felt like a rubber stamp, then stacked 3 part-time jobs to keep the promises I'd made to myself. Mornings slinging eggs and coffee at a diner that smelled like syrup and fatigue. Afternoons shoving books at the campus library with a hush felt like mercy. Nights bent over data entry with my dorm window reflecting a girl who was always, always tired. 3 years later, when it was Jason's turn to start college, money appeared like magic tricks. My parents took out a second mortgage, relatives whispered investment, and I bit the inside of my cheek and kept working, because I had learned that fairness is not a family value everywhere. Somehow I graduated anyway, a computer science degree in one hand and a batch of survival skills in the other. Then spent 6 hungry months chasing interviews in Detroit until a tech firm finally said yes, and a salary with more zeros than I'd ever seen settled into my bank account like a sunrise I didn't trust yet. And for a brief season, I exhaled, bought groceries without checking my balance 3 times, and let myself imagine a future that wasn't an emergency plan. But the calls started almost immediately. Soft at first. "How's the job, honey?" Then heavier. "The mortgage is tight this month. The electric came early. The car needs brakes." And I loved them and I felt guilty and I told myself kindness means action. So I paid one bill, then another, told myself it was a bridge. Told myself bridges are temporary until one day you realize you're living on one. And without a single formal conversation, the arrangement ossified into duty. $800 for the mortgage, $400 for utilities, $600 for car payments. The phone plan, the internet, the cable, the streaming platforms Mom said made evenings feel less lonely. The insurance, the surprise repairs, the just for now that lasted years. And every time I tried to talk about boundaries, another fire seemed to leap up. Late fees, medical copays, a broken water heater, until it felt cruel to say no. So I kept saying yes, and my own plans thinned out into the margins. Meanwhile, Jason collected business ideas the way some people collect souvenirs. Dropshipping electronics that fizzled after 6 months. A food truck dream that never purchased a truck. A crypto investment club that burned $15,000 he convinced our parents to chip into. Each failure rebranded as learning. Each pivot applauded as vision. And neighbors heard about our son the entrepreneur, while my steady work that actually paid the bills lived in the shadow like a power cord no one notices until it's gone. My best friend Lauren, who met me back in the campus coffee shop years earlier and had watched this dynamic from the bleachers, poured us 2 glasses of red one Thursday and said the thing I couldn't say to myself. They're using you, Mag. You're giving them $9,600 a year just on the big stuff, and for what? A grunt and another favor? And I tried to explain the way guilt knots itself around love, how letting the house slip into foreclosure would haunt me, how responsibility doesn't always feel like a choice, but even as I defended the pattern, I heard the hollowness in my own voice. Proof of the pattern sparkled in small vignettes that should have been happy. Mom's 60th birthday and when I surprised my parents with a Chicago weekend, theater tickets, and a Michelin star reservation I'd saved 2 months to afford. And when they came home, all the oxygen in the room went to Jason's handwritten card and his call from the train. My gift reduced to, we had a nice time, before the conversations were back to Jason's next great idea. The spring Dad had gallbladder surgery and I took unpaid leave, cooked and cleaned and sorted his medications and drove him to follow-ups while Jason couldn't make it because of business meetings that I later learned were just poker nights. And at the end of those 2 weeks, Dad studied the pill organizer I labeled and muttered that Jason would have done it better, and I pretended the words were water, not knives. When Jason's subscription pet toy box collapsed after 3 months and 2 local investors threatened legal action, my parents called with the tone that knew the answer before the question. Maybe I could help my brother out of this little situation. And when I said no for once, when I protected the line that stopped at $12,000, winter settled over our conversations for weeks. The air crowded with phrases like family loyalty and we raised you. And inside my apartment, I stared at a clear glass jar on my shelf with a handwritten label that read emergency fund and knew Lauren was right to call it my guilt jar because it filled with money I refused to spend on myself in case my parents needed saving again. A ritual of self-erasure disguised as prudence. Then 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, a door I had been pushing against finally opened on its own. At work, I led a complex rollout for a major client, and we shipped on time. Under stress, but without disaster. The CEO stopped by our pod to say he was impressed, and a holiday bonus landed in my account that made me think in soft colors. Maybe a down payment by spring. Maybe a different kind of life. And I was still holding that hope like a warm cup when Mom called and said, "We were thinking you could host this year. Our place is cramped, your apartment is nicer." And even though last year they'd called my chairs uncomfortable and my cooking untraditional, I said yes, because yes was muscle memory, and because some small, stubborn part of me still believed that effort buys appreciation. Lauren pushed a cart alongside me at the grocery store that weekend, watched me choose the organic turkey, the premium sides, the 3 different pies, and the good wine, raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you sure they'll appreciate this? Last year your mom said your mashed potatoes were too creamy." And I laughed too quickly and said, "This year will be different. We have things to celebrate. I got a bonus. Maybe they'll see me. Maybe they'll finally see me." And when I called Jason to ask if he could bring anything, he said cash was tight, but he'd definitely be there, and that a new venture was about to land with big investors. And the music of his video game bled through the phone while I told him not to worry, I had it covered. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Mom called with the phrase that always meant trouble. "We've been thinking," and suggested moving dinner back to their house because Aunt Barbara wanted to see the place and Dad preferred holidays at home. And I stared at the fridge I'd already stocked and the autumn table runner I'd just bought and said I'd already prepped so much. And she said cheerfully I could just bring it all over. It would be cozier. So I repacked effort into containers and pretended the detour was part of the plan. That evening, dropping off some advanced dishes, I came in quietly through the back and heard Dad on the phone tell a relative, "Sure, Megan's helping with dinner, though between us, she never does enough for us considering how well she's doing, all that money, and she still lets us struggle sometimes." And I froze in the hallway holding a pot of brightening liquid while a sentence I would never forget burned itself into my ribs. Never does enough. And the truth I'd been dodging for years stood up and looked me in the eye. I slept badly, got up before the gray sky decided to be morning, and packed the car with food and wine and decorations and the good plates wrapped in towels so they wouldn't chip. Then drove the 40 minutes to the house whose mortgage left my account on the first of every month, practicing the same quiet pep talk I'd been saying to myself for years. Today will be different. They'll notice. They'll care. Pulled up to the curb, turned off the engine, took 3 deep breaths, reached for the first heavy grocery bags, and walked toward the front door, not yet knowing that before the day ended, a word I had worn like a name would shatter, and I would finally stop paying for a love that never once paid me back. Dad opened the door after my third knock, and instead of greeting me, his eyes flicked past the bags, straining my arms to the car in the driveway. And the first thing he said was, "You're blocking the space Jason will need when he gets here." I forced a smile, told him I'd move it after unloading, but the sting landed anyway. I stepped into the house carrying a 20-pound turkey and bags of produce while he muttered about fancy cars, even though the sedan parked outside was the first new vehicle I'd ever bought, after nearly a decade of nursing my old college beater along. Mom appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, and gave me a once-over that ended in a tight smile. She said some of us have been cooking since 6 this morning, so we didn't have time to dress up like that. Her eyes lingering on my burgundy sweater dress and minimal makeup. I shrugged off the comment and explained that I'd prepped everything so it was ready to cook. She nodded, but quickly added she had already started her stuffing since Dad only liked her recipe. I carried the heavy bags into the kitchen, and for the next 2 hours, I worked alone, basting the turkey, timing the side dishes, setting trays of vegetables into the oven while, from the living room, I heard the television drone and the occasional cheer for a football play. The smell of roasting herbs filled the air, but no one came to help. Around 1:30, the doorbell rang and I wiped my hands before peeking out, just in time to see Jason being pulled into a hero's embrace by both parents, as if his arrival alone was the main course. He brought nothing but himself, yet their voices rang with joy. Dad clapping him on the back, calling him the man of the hour. When Jason finally noticed me through the kitchen doorway, he grinned and said, "Something smells good, sis. You always were the kitchen wizard." Then turned back to bask in more praise. Moments later, Aunt Barbara, Uncle George, and Cousin Natalie bustled in with soda bottles and the store-bought pumpkin pie that earned extravagant gratitude from Mom. She told them proudly that I had insisted on cooking everything myself. Aunt Barbara wandered into the kitchen, gave me a warm hug, and asked if she could help. For a moment, I almost cried from relief at her kindness. Asked her to help set the table with the good china I had washed earlier. And as she laid out the plates, she chatted about her community garden and Natalie's college classes. It was the first genuine conversation of the day. By 3 o'clock, the table groaned under a perfect Thanksgiving spread. The golden brown turkey, the mashed potatoes rich and creamy, the roasted vegetables glistening with olive oil, the homemade cranberry sauce, the pies cooling on the counter, both traditional and oyster stuffing despite Mom's earlier jab. Dad carved the turkey, muttering that it looked a bit dry. Mom commented that she usually covered hers with butter before roasting. I bit my tongue, knowing I had basted it with herb butter or morning. Dad sipped the wine I had splurged on and called it too sweet. Jason gulped his second glass and said, "Free booze is the best kind," and they all laughed. I sat at the far end of the table while Jason sat between our parents at the head, like royalty. Dad prayed before the meal, thanking God for Jason's safe return, health, and family, but never mentioned my efforts. We began to eat, and for a moment, I let myself believe the food might speak for me. But when Uncle George asked politely about my job and I explained I was a senior software developer who had just led a project that earned my company a major contract, Dad cut in. "So you fix computers when they break?" "No, Dad, I designed the systems that run them," I clarified. But before I could continue, Mom pivoted the attention back to Jason, urging him to share his latest idea with the family. And just like that, my achievement disappeared under the weight of his fantasy. He launched into a speech about a revolutionary fitness app that would change home workouts forever. He bragged about meetings with investors that didn't exist and calculated that he only needed $40,000 to get started. Mom's eyes shone with pride. Dad called him an entrepreneur, while I quietly ate the turkey that wasn't dry at all. When I cautiously asked Jason what made his app unique in a saturated market, he rolled his eyes and accused me of trying to steal his idea. Mom sighed and told everyone I was raining on Jason's parade. I insisted I was only being realistic given his 3 failed ventures in as many years, but Jason snapped that I was jealous and couldn't stand that Mom and Dad supported his ambitions. The word support lodged in my chest. And before I could stop myself, I said, "Do you know who has actually been supporting Mom and Dad for the past 8 years? Me. The mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, all of it. $9,600 a year." The table fell silent. Aunt Barbara's fork clinked against her plate. Natalie stared at her dessert. Dad's face darkened and he said, "We do not discuss family finances in front of guests." But I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told them if they invested in Jason's fantasy with their dwindling retirement savings, they would lose everything. And who did they think would be expected to pick up the pieces? Dad's jaw tightened. Mom protested weakly that it wasn't fair, but I laid it all out. The loans I worked off alone, the bills I paid every month while Jason got tuition gifts and applause, the gratitude I had been waiting for that never came. I finished with the truth that if they risked their future on another one of Jason's failures, I could not and would not increase my support. Dad's hand slammed the table, rattling plates and glasses, his face red as he roared, "Get out. Paying bills does not make you family." The words cut deeper than any insult he had ever spoken. Mom leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for all to hear, "You've always been jealous of your brother, always difficult, always ungrateful." Something inside me finally stilled. I placed my napkin beside my plate, stood and said quietly, "Then let him pay the $9,600. Without another word, I walked to the closet for my coat. Dad shouted after me, telling me not to bother coming back for Christmas. Aunt Barbara tried to reason with him, but his eyes were hard with years of resentment. I slipped on my coat. Natalie followed to the hallway, asked softly if I was okay to drive. I nodded, thanked her, and stepped out into the cold night air. My car, the fancy one they mocked, waited at the curb. And as I slipped behind the wheel, tears blurred the windshield. I drove without destination until I reached Riverside Park, where the Grand River ran black under the winter sky, and sat on a bench clutching my keys. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "How's the family circus?" I didn't text back. I called her sobbing until the words tangled in my throat. She told me to stay put, and 20 minutes later, her headlights appeared. She sat beside me, listened as I spilled everything, every insult, every dismissal, every number I had carried alone. And when I was done, she squeezed my shoulder and said what I couldn't say myself. "They've been taking advantage of you for years, and tonight they told you exactly what you mean to them. Now it's time to believe them." Lauren's words rang in my ears the whole drive back to my apartment. She told me it was time to take back my power, and though my hands shook on the steering wheel, I knew she was right. When I walked into my place that night, the silence felt heavier than usual, like the walls were waiting for me to finally notice how empty I had kept my own life while I filled everyone else's. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began to calculate what I had really given my parents over the years, line by line. The numbers stared back at me. $800 every month for the mortgage, $400 for utilities, $600 for car payments, $180 for auto insurance, $120 for the family phone plan, $150 for internet and cable, $45 for streaming services, an average of $200 in emergency extras, all adding up to nearly $2,500 a month, almost $30,000 a year. I had thought it was $9,600 because that was just the mortgage, utilities, and car payments. But the truth was far worse. I had handed them close to $250,000 in 8 years, money that could have bought me a house, money that could have built me a future. Instead, it was swallowed by a black hole of entitlement and never once repaid with gratitude. The realization made me dizzy. As I scrolled through bank statements, I remembered Dad's voice booming, "Paying bills does not make you family," and Mom whispering, "You've always been jealous of your brother." The contempt in their voices crashed against the spreadsheet on my screen, and something inside me hardened. I moved from the spreadsheet to my accounts and started dismantling the web I had spun around them. First, the mortgage autopay was canceled, then the utilities, then the car payments, insurance, phone, internet, each one gone with a few keystrokes. I sent formal emails transferring responsibility back to their names, effective immediately. Then I turned to the streaming services. I changed the passwords, removed their devices from the accounts, then to the smart home system I had installed after a neighbor's break-in. The cameras, the thermostats, the locks, all of it linked to my credit card. With a few clicks, I wiped my information and shut it down, backing up the settings for myself before disabling their access. With every confirmation email that arrived in my inbox, I felt lighter. This wasn't revenge, it was liberation. For 8 years, I had equated giving with love. I had convinced myself that sacrifice would eventually earn me appreciation, but all it bought me was dismissal and scorn. Lauren had told me the truth. Some people are simply incapable of gratitude, and the longer you wait for it, the more it drains you. At 11:30, I closed the last account and leaned back in my chair, breathing like someone who had been underwater for years and finally broken the surface. I wrote a brief note to my HR department requesting a week of personal leave, citing a family emergency. Then I texted Aunt Barbara apologizing for the scene at dinner and explaining that what happened was the result of years of imbalance and that I needed time away from my parents to reevaluate my relationship with them. I turned off my phone, swallowed a sleep aid, and for the first time in 8 years, fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, free from the weight of being my parents' keeper. I woke the next morning to a phone buzzing itself off the nightstand, 40 missed calls, dozens of texts, and a line of voicemails stacked one after another. The first was from Aunt Barbara, her voice urgent. "Megan, call me back as soon as you get this. There's a situation at your parents' house. They woke up to everything shut down, the alarm going off, they couldn't reset it because the password changed. Your dad called the police. They're there right now. Please call me." The next message was from Jason, full of fury. "What the hell did you do? The car got repossessed this morning. I was supposed to drive to a meeting. Now I'm stranded. Fix this now." Then came my mother's voice, shifting tones with every voicemail. At 7:30 sharp, anger. "Megan Ann Morris, you call us back right now and explain these accounts." By 8:15, panic. "The mortgage company called. They said the payment was canceled. Is this a joke?" By 8:45, manipulation. "Your father is having chest pains from the stress. If anything happens, it's on your conscience." By 9, pleading. "Sweetheart, if we said anything to upset you, we're sorry. Just call us back. We can't handle this all at once." My father left one at 8:30, his voice cold. "Whatever stunt you're pulling, it stops now. I've spoken to Cousin Carrie, the lawyer, and he says what you're doing could count as elder financial abuse. You have until noon to restore everything, or we'll take legal action." I scrolled through the texts, each one a snapshot of chaos. Utilities threatening shutoff, mortgage notices forwarding in all caps, questions from Jason filled with blame and insult. Then a softer one from Natalie. "Just checking on you, things are crazy here, but I understand why you did what you did. They've treated you unfairly for a long time. Please take care of yourself." Uncle George, too, left a surprising message. "Megan, I know this is messy, but the way your father dismissed your contributions last night was wrong. Eleanor and Richard have told us for years Jason was helping financially. We were shocked to learn it's been you all along. Take whatever time you need. Not everyone in this family thinks you're wrong." I sat on my couch listening to each word, weighing guilt against truth. And for the first time, the truth was heavier. I opened my email, drafted one message, addressed to my parents, copied to Jason, Aunt Barbara, and Uncle George. "Dear Mom and Dad, last night you made it clear my financial contributions don't count as family loyalty. Dad said paying bills doesn't make you family, then told me not to come back for Christmas. I've spent 8 years paying nearly $30,000 a year for your mortgage, utilities, cars, insurance, phone, internet, and more. In total, almost $240,000. all taken for granted while Jason was praised for failed ventures. I respected your wishes by removing myself completely from your finances. Accounts are now in your names. Medical emergencies should be handled by 911, not by guilt, threats of legal action. Don't apply since every account was in my name, voluntarily funded. I'll be taking time away to reassess our relationship. Megan. I hit send, and within minutes, Mom called again. I let it ring to voicemail, her voice trembling. Megan, please, your father's at the hospital. His blood pressure spiked. The doctor says it could have been a stroke. You need to come immediately. My chest clenched until a new text appeared from Natalie. Don't believe them. He isn't at the hospital. He and Aunt Eleanor are at the house with the police trying to claim you hacked their systems. I thought you should know. I opened the app that still gave me remote access to the cameras, and sure enough, there was Dad pacing the living room, gesturing wildly at two officers, perfectly healthy, if red with rage. The manipulation was staggering. I texted Natalie, "Thank you," then set the phone down. My parents weren't panicked about survival. They were panicked about losing control. And for the first time, I wasn't going to give it back. The hours that followed were a blur of messages, alternating between fury and desperation. Jason fired off texts dripping with venom, accusing me of destroying the family, of humiliating Mom and Dad in front of police, of leaving them without basic necessities. He ended one with, "This is your mess. Fix it," while Mom switched between begging and blaming. 1 minute saying, "We can't pay the bills without you." The next hissing, "If anything happens to your father, it's on your conscience." Dad stayed cold and sharp, his words legalistic, promising consequences if I didn't restore everything by noon. But noon came and went, and nothing happened, except the silence of my refusal to answer. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally sending a single-word reply: no. And then turned off my phone for the rest of the day. When I turned it back on that evening, the storm had slowed slightly. There were still dozens of notifications, but the edge of panic had dulled into resignation. Aunt Barbara updated me gently that they had dipped into their retirement savings to get the utilities reinstated and to make the mortgage payment. Jason had moved back into their house temporarily, but true to form, he contributed nothing except complaints. She said it felt less like help and more like another burden. Natalie continued to check in on me, sending quiet encouragements without pressure, telling me she admired my strength. Even Uncle George called again to say I had done what he always hoped someone in the family would do: draw a line that Eleanor and Richard couldn't cross anymore. Meanwhile, I tried to focus on myself. For the first time in years, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist specializing in family trauma. I went for long walks without my phone buzzing with demands. I slept through the night without dreaming about overdue bills. I cooked simple dinners for myself and ate them in peace, discovering that silence could be healing, not suffocating. The guilt jar in my living room sat empty for once, and instead of filling it, I tucked the cash into a savings account under my own name, labeled Future, not Family. By the end of the week, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. My parents were not collapsing without me. They were adapting. They were angry, they were loud, but they were still alive, still capable. And the only difference was that I was no longer the silent lifeline feeding them from the shadows. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted, and I began to wonder what my life might look like if I never shifted it back. Christmas approached with an email from Mom. Subject line: Family Emergency Meeting. She announced they would host dinner at their house and expected everyone to attend so that we could put this unfortunate Thanksgiving incident behind us. Reading it, I felt my jaw tighten. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had been said, no recognition of the years I had carried them, just a demand disguised as an invitation. Jason followed up with a text dripping with guilt. "Mom and Dad might lose the house by January if you don't help. Is that what you want to see, your own parents homeless because of your pride? This is on you, Megan." I showed Lauren during one of our weekly dinners, and she shook her head. "Classic triangulation," she said. They still believe their financial mess is your responsibility. Not once have they apologized, not once have they thanked you. They've only demanded, threatened, and pretended nothing happened. She was right, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to argue back. The weeks turned into months, and slowly the storm of messages dwindled. Aunt Barbara invited me to Sunday dinners without my parents. Natalie sent check-in texts that made me feel less alone. Even Mom's sister Diane reached out privately to tell me she had always seen the favoritism that defined our house when I was a child. It was like doors opening that I hadn't known existed, small reminders that not everyone shared my parents' blindness. I poured my energy into therapy, into work, and into rebuilding the self I had buried under duty. My therapist urged me to journal, and as I filled notebook pages with years of unspoken hurt, I began to untangle the knots in my chest. I started meditating to quiet the panic that used to flare whenever my phone rang, and I found myself sleeping deeply at last. I even joined a climbing gym, discovering the thrill of gripping a wall, hauling myself upward, and realizing strength could be chosen, not inherited. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I moved into a new apartment in a secure building where my family didn't know the address. The money that once vanished into their accounts began growing in my own savings, and with it, I started a side business, a small web development consultancy that reminded me my skills could build something for myself, not just for others. My parents, meanwhile, sold their house, downsized into a rental. Dad took part-time work as a security guard. Mom picked up more hours at the dental office. They managed, Jason's app never materialized, and without their ability to fund his ideas, he ended up working at a sporting goods store, still living at home, still blaming me, according to Natalie. But their choices no longer sat on my shoulders, and that freedom tasted like air after years underwater. In early spring, a Christmas card arrived, 5 months late. The front, a generic snowy village, the inside a printed greeting with a handwritten note in Mom's script. We are having Christmas dinner at 4 o'clock. The past is the past. Family should be together. There was no apology, no reflection, just the same assumption that I would step back into line. I wrote a brief response, polite but firm. Thank you for the invitation. I will not be attending this year. I wish you both well, but I am still healing from Thanksgiving and from the imbalance that has defined our relationship. Maybe one day we can rebuild on mutual respect. Until then, I need distance. They never replied, and I no longer needed them to. The 1-year anniversary of my independence arrived quietly. I marked it by taking myself on a weekend trip to Chicago, staying in the same hotel where I had once sent them for Mom's birthday. This time the luxury was mine, and the irony was not lost on me as I ate alone in the restaurant they had once bragged about to neighbors. I raised a glass to myself for surviving the storm. Not all family ties were severed. Aunt Barbara and Uncle George became more like parents than my own, calling regularly, celebrating my work, never asking for anything but my company. Natalie and I grew close over coffee dates, her steady kindness stitching a bond that felt more like sisterhood than cousinship. Even Aunt Diane, who had long stayed quiet, confided that she had seen the favoritism for years and wished she had spoken up sooner. It was validation I hadn't realized I needed. Slowly, I began to date again. Michael, a kind architect, introduced by a friend, listened without flinching when I explained my estrangement. He took my hand and said, "Family is not who you owe, but who makes you feel that you belong." With those words, the last pieces of my guilt began to fall away. Looking back at that Thanksgiving, I realized my father's cruel dismissal had been an unintentional gift. By telling me I wasn't family, he freed me from the prison I had built, trying to buy love with sacrifice. He forced me to face the truth that real family is chosen by respect and kindness, not by blood and obligation. And as painful as it was, that truth gave me a life that finally felt like mine. A year after that night, I looked around my life and saw how much had changed. The constant anxiety of wondering what bill would land next was gone, replaced by the steady rhythm of my own rent, my own savings, my own plans. My consulting business had grown from weekend side projects into a stream of clients who valued my skills enough to pay me directly. I no longer woke up dreading phone calls. Instead, I checked messages from friends who wanted to meet for dinner or colleagues who offered new opportunities. Therapy had rewired the way I thought about myself, each journal entry peeling away another layer of guilt, each meditation loosening the grip of old fear. Climbing walls taught me the rush of choosing my own battles and conquering them, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Meanwhile, my parents adjusted to their new reality, their downsized rental, their modest jobs, their inability to prop Jason up forever. According to Natalie, he still complained constantly, blaming me for his failures. But without a blank check to fund them, he had settled into working retail. Bitter but stable. It was strange to realize they were capable all along, that the collapse I had feared if I withdrew never came. The world didn't end. They adapted. And in that realization, I felt the last threads of obligation snap. I even started planning for the future. Trips I had postponed for years, dreams I had filed away under someday, now moved into my calendar. Someday had become now. The people who filled my circle were those who saw me, valued me, celebrated me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. And each day I learned a little more that freedom is not the absence of family, but the presence of the right kind of family. On the anniversary of that Thanksgiving, I lit a candle in my apartment, not as a memorial to what I had lost, but as a quiet celebration of what I had gained: peace, autonomy, and the ability to decide who earned space in my life. Aunt Barbara and Uncle George invited me for dinner that weekend, and I went without hesitation. Their home felt warm, not because of expensive things, but because I was welcomed simply for being myself. Natalie hugged me at the door and whispered, "I'm proud of you. You taught me it's okay to set boundaries." And her words sank deeper than she knew. Aunt Diane called later that week, telling me again how she had watched for years the way my parents favored Jason, and how she wished she had spoken up sooner. And though she couldn't change the past, she wanted me to know she always saw me. Those acknowledgments became bricks in the foundation of a new identity, one where I was not invisible, not just a wallet, not second place to my brother. I was Megan, with a thriving career, a growing business, friends who cheered my victories, and family members who finally said aloud what I had always needed to hear: that I mattered. The shift was profound. Instead of waiting for my parents' approval, I built a life where it was no longer required. Instead of financing their dreams, I invested in my own. I took weekend trips to cities I had always wanted to see, tried foods I had once denied myself because money was reserved for emergencies. I signed up for a photography class, bought my own climbing gear, treated myself to small luxuries that reminded me it was okay to enjoy, not just endure. Slowly, the scars of years of dismissal began to fade, replaced by a sense of worthiness that no one could revoke, not even the people who had given me life but withheld their love. Looking back now, I see that the night my father told me paying bills does not make you family was not just cruelty. It was the truth I needed to hear, because in that moment, I realized I had been trying to purchase acceptance that was never for sale. I stopped pouring my hard-earned money into a bottomless pit of entitlement and instead began investing in myself, my health, my future, my joy. I am no longer the daughter waiting for a thank you that will never come. I am a woman who knows her value. I built a business that thrives, a circle of people who support me without conditions, and a home that feels safe, not because it is paid for by guilt, but because it is mine. Jason may still chase illusions, my parents may still refuse to see what they lost, but that is no longer my burden. I carry only my own dreams now, and they are enough. I have learned that real family is not measured by bloodlines or by obligation. It is measured by respect, kindness, and presence. Sometimes you were born into it, sometimes you find it along the way, and sometimes you create it yourself. I have chosen the latter, and I am finally free. If you have ever had to step away from toxic family members, if you have ever drawn a line to protect your own heart, I would love to hear your story too. Share your thoughts in the comments because maybe your words will be the encouragement someone else needs to choose themselves, just as I finally chose me.